So I had a bunch of funny jokes to open with and make everybody feel at ease, but I was sitting there, and as you guys sang, it was the presence of Holy Spirit that came upon me, and I felt it very powerfully, and it makes me emotional when that happens. So I don't apologize for that, but I recognize and I honor the Spirit here amongst you all. Thank you for what you are for the community, what you guys do. You're represented very well at Shannon. I'm grateful for that. And anytime there's been a need, I think back in our times where you had the missionary house, the guest house, and you guys were always so gracious to allow our families, if they were in need of a place to stay, to be able to open the doors to accommodate them. And so I thank you for that. That measure of hospitality is huge. And there's countless number of people that you blessed. You probably don't know the number, and I don't either, but that feels like the stuff that they speak of about the eternal blessings, the things that are stored up in heaven for us. So I thank you, and I bless you for that gift that y'all gave to others. So I know we're limited somewhat in time versus what we have to be able to share. And so I want to be aware that Robyn has probably equally important and very weighty things that she wants to share with you. So I want to just jump in there real quick. I do want to share with you just a picture. This is Robyn's practice to show a picture of our family before she speaks. I've never done that. It's the first time I've ever done it. It was just to make her smile. She's smiling. So win. I did it. And maybe I'll let her speak about them. These are our grandchildren. I don't even know all their names. We've had so many. I'm blessed beyond measure. I can't recall their names. So I'll let her talk about that part there. So this is a slide put together by somebody else that's a lot smarter than me, but in a snapshot, it gives you just a perspective of what Shannon does and what they're about. There's a lot there. There's a lot that's going on inside of the Shannon Medical Center about the Shannon as a whole and how we serve not only our community, but that region. You see the 25 counties served. That seems insanely large and very broad, but that's the reality, is that there's a lot going on that Shannon has been blessed to be able to do. And in that sense of knowing that it's, they use the term legacy, it feels like it's legacy work. And so I'm honored to be a part of that and honored to help share whatever small part we can contribute inside of that work. So I ran across these slides I'm going to show you here. There's about 6 slides. It was from an event about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it was put on by the National Associations of Chaplains and a network. And it speaks very clearly about a survey that was done across the United States, and it was surveying, asking about pastoral care programs or chaplaincy in general. And so I'm going to just cite a couple of these real quick in my effort to speak about what chaplains do and what chaplains are. So the demographics here that it kind of speaks to. So there was 800 respondents, and I'll go ahead and qualify this now by saying half of those respondents were chaplains, so take this with a grain of salt. So I don't know how valid it can be. It does represent, I would say, the majority of folks would identify themselves as Christians. Of that, about 60% of the respondents were inside of the Catholic side of things. About 35% were more Protestants. And that's not really reflective of what's in the nation. The reality is this organization aligns himself a little bit more closely to the Catholic side of work in hospital settings than it does for our Protestants. So it does, though, pretty accurately, the rest of the information that flows forth pretty clearly identifies where our folks are coming from. And I apologize, as I'm looking at this now, I don't know if you're able to read that as well. But so the type of areas that pastoral care and chaplaincy covers, generally speaking, it's the largest inside of the urban settings. And that's fairly consistent. Again, this was back in 2016. I like it that it shows a previous survey from just 2004, a few years prior to that. And it kind of shows a trend, if you will. I think you can extrapolate some of that. The most concerning part to me is that rural setting where a lot of the smaller hospitals, we're very well aware of what's happened with them over the years, and that is that their funding has dried up, that they're not as popular. A lot of those have kind of mothballed, and they had to move their services to a larger town next door, or even a city a little bit further away. But chaplaincy was definitely on the decline there. The majority of these come from not-for-profits that provide chaplaincy or pastoral care programs. That's still pretty accurate, I would believe. And then there's also a slide here that I think is really telling. So about 61% of these respondents, and I think also across the nation, fairly accurate to say that they have chaplaincy programs. Interestingly enough, this is identified inside of a professional or an unpaid volunteer. I don't like that they use the term professional, and then down here they say unpaid. The reality is, maybe you've identified folks like this before that didn't have any credentials, didn't have any training, no formalized education part, but the effort that they demonstrated in their heart that they were operating from, purely amazing. But they do differentiate the two there. Professional chaplains are usually identified as having a formal education. Inside of our field, it's generally understood that you have a Master's of Divinity, a 4-year degree, and then you've also completed about 4 units of what's called CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education. And so you see how those are kind of broken down there as well. But what I think is really consistent for us as well, and I was using their slides all the way through, and then I went back at the end to format my slides to make them look better. Unbeknownst to me, I just put a line right through that stuff, so it doesn't look very good. So what we do, though, is very similar. So these respondents here were dialed in from a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being what they do the most. Provide end-of-life care. That's what a lot of chaplains are usually identified with doing, and that comes in a lot of different forms. Provide emotional support for patients and families, and I'm not going to read every one of those for you, but you're welcome to kind of glance at those. And I've got 2 more of those slides essentially there as well. This one, crisis counseling, debriefing for staff, that one for us locally has grown, I would say, of any one area of the growth inside of our ministry, our chaplaincy at Shannon, it's been that one alone. During the pandemic, obviously that was not good. It was bad upon bad upon bad, and for the most part, our staff suffered the most. Volunteer staff, our professional staff, the paid staff, young men and women coming right out of college and going into that in the midst of the pandemic, that was really a huge one for me, that I saw just a lot of, I don't want to say harm, but a lot of brokenness that they were walking in the midst of. And I would hear other more seasoned nurses say, this is not how it's supposed to be for them. This should not be their first job out of school to come in and step into the midst of a pandemic. So what we've done over the last 2 years, I would say maybe even 36 months, has been to align ourselves with an organization called the ICISF. Terrible name, ICISF, International Critical Incident Stress Foundation. So what it does is it provides critical incident stress management training in a formalized method designed specifically for it to be peer-to-peer based. So that means training, equipping, preparing nurses, folks in the lab, the aides that assist in the ER setting, even sometimes inside of the engineering department, having folks that are prepared and trained to go help care for their co-laborers, their other workers alongside with them. We've just finished one of our first classes just a few months ago and had 22 more people trained to that group. I think it's a fantastic program. It is, I'm always quick to say, it's not psychotherapy. It's not a means by which we encroach upon the professional mental health field, but it is just the preparation for folks to be able to help sort through and navigate difficult traumatic events. And what we found is there's a direct tie to how they deal with those traumatic events and their resiliency, and then also the retention at the hospital level. So you want to see a big turnover in a hospital, let there be some type of a traumatic event, something dealing with a child or something that's been kind of a line of duty death or accident, and then don't provide any support for those folks. You come back in about 6 months and the majority will be gone. That's the quickest way to tell how well you're taking care of your staff. To that point, in the next breath, I realized that we still have had a lot of turnover. It's difficult sometimes to keep folks in the midst of the pandemic. I think that's been fairly common throughout the United States, though. I forget what they term that as, kind of the silent something where they've gone away, and a lot of folks are not too vocal about it. But there's this just been an amazing mass exodus for folks in a lot of different fields. School teachers, sales departments, go to a restaurant or hotel and see that they're understaffed or short-staffed. That is remarkable, and it's been pretty well trending through the hospital system to the medical field as well. And again, kind of continuing on with the things that chaplains do. This is from the survey, but it's true for us as well. And this is one that I've been involved with here recently. About 18 months ago, I accepted the role of the chairperson of our ethics committee, the hospital ethics committee. And that's been a huge blessing. I've been serving in that, on that committee, or in that committee, for about 9 years. And so when our chairperson left, I was asked to chair that committee. I've absolutely loved that. It's been phenomenal work. I've enjoyed it. It's challenging, but there's something about a chaplain that has a desire to see justice be served, or those who have no voice or little voice to be able to be represented fairly, and to also, in times, represent and speak to the idea about there's not any more of this to provide. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but they have 4 basic or kind of founding principles, if you will, that ethics evolves around. And those ideas are justice, autonomy, non-maleficence, and beneficence. All of those have a separate and very unique function inside of sorting through ethical dilemmas. So again, I'll talk about that in just a second, though. And then finally, the last page here for what the chaplains do. I don't know about the promote the patient safety part of that. We do have this idea of being representative for patients. And while we don't have a formalized process involved for representing patients, like some hospitals do, we certainly do have the opportunity to speak on behalf of patients or family members that have a concern or a need. And it seems as though staff broad and wide appreciate and receive it well when the chaplains voice something on behalf of a patient or a family member. So I'm grateful for that. I think that gives us the opportunity to be involved in situations that are sometimes challenging, but very necessary. And then finally here, we have a very strong program in Shannon also. Texas Organ Sharing Alliance is our OPO, or organ procurement organization. All of the hospitals across the nation are required by law to be involved in some form of an organ procurement process. Ours is the TOSA, or Texas Organ Sharing Alliance. So it's very difficult work in those times, those settings where an individual has suffered some kind of a neurologic injury causing death, or even more recently, they've added a new provision to that called DCD, or death after circulatory death, which is a little bit different. I think we normally think about organ donation coming after the process of somebody dying, generally by some kind of a neurologic injury. But about the last 7 years, they've pushed or promoted the opportunity for an individual to have the opportunity to donate after the death by circulatory death. So that's another one that's been very common here of late. So for Shannon specific, you'll kind of eyeball that list for a second. You'll see some of those things are very common to what I just showed you in the way of the responses from that survey. When we're adding chaplains, whether that's in a PRN or as needed basis, or a professional chaplain full-time, no matter what their abilities, their skill set, their education has been, if they don't have that first one, that ability to bring a non-judgmental, non-anxious presence amid a traumatic or an emergent situation, they're of little use inside of that role. If you could just identify a trait really quickly for what lends itself well to do pastoral care ministry, it's that one. So I put this together a few years ago, actually, for folks that were joining our hospital, usually in some kind of a managerial or leadership role. And when I got to visit with them, I found it was helpful just to have a, piece of paper front and back with some of the things that we do. So they would be aware that they could call upon chaplains for different things. So I kind of used it for my slide here as I was preparing to get here. But it does a really good job of just kind of snapshotting what it is that we're able to help out with. Generally speaking, it's not unusual to see in the scope of a week chaplains demonstrating some of these interventions or some of these opportunities to help. It's a pretty unique opportunity that we have. I tell people sometimes when they ask about the heaviness or the burdensome aspect of that it does become burdensome. It is heavy, the things that we get exposed to and the things that we help walk people through. But the reality is that there is a blessing inside of that. And if I could offer one thing of just my own personal perspective on how that's looked, it's been to be able to have self-care, to not let a situation that I'm walking in the midst of become my own. And so you hear people talk about don't take it home with you, and I know that it sounds trite, but there's a component of truth in that says if it was my mother, brother, child that I've just assisted a family with after a death, I can't do that. I'm not able to care for myself after I've been trying to be helpful to somebody else after the death of a loved one that close to me. That measure of, I guess, the space there, that distance there. And so I recognize that that's a really important component inside of doing surgery. And so you can't operate on your own child. And I can't do the things that I do for other family members if it's going to be my family member as well. As I talked a moment ago there, that idea about that ICISF coordinates the Critical Incident Stress Management Program. That, again, has been a beautiful blessing for us. Our goal is to expand that beyond Shannon. And fortunately, the 22 people I mentioned just a moment ago for the last training we did, there were about 8 that were outside of Shannon. So we drew from Goodfellow, we drew from the county prison, we had another member from another hospital outside of San Angelo. So our goal would be to be more of a regional network to help out those 25 counties we just identified a moment ago. So we know a lot of the smaller towns are not able to staff and have the training adequate to be able to do their own style of program unless there's somebody in a role to kind of take the burden of that or the brunt of that. And so the training becomes really expensive, and so Shannon has been very gracious to make sure that we're reaching out, kind of enveloping the other smaller towns and communities. So Robert Lee, Sterling City, Bront, Sonora, all of those other small little regional towns, I think are going to be very receptive and appreciative to having this type of an CISM program available to them. And one of the things that I think people forget about sometimes that we're really very adept at helping reach out to the military in those times of need where you're trying to find a service member to come home to see their loved one. So we utilize the Red Cross in large part for that function, and then also for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to help out with those individuals, our patients that have family members that are incarcerated. So I'm convinced that even though an individual is in prison or incarcerated, that component of grief, suffering, sadness, all of those things are still affecting them, and sometimes even in a more profound way because of their lack to be there and walk this side of whatever sense of emergent situation that they're facing is. I've heard other folks that have been incarcerated and lost a loved one and weren't able to be in touch or even just express their heart for that person, that was one of the most traumatizing components of their incarceration. So I'm mindful about that. I've had a family member that was incarcerated for a period of time before, and the reality is that whatever it is they've done, they were convicted for, they're paying a price for it. But the reality of that impact that can be profoundly impactful for them and hurt a great deal for them. So we do that well. I think that's a blessing that our chaplains get to provide that a lot of folks are not aware of. So inside of that one, the death part, there's a lot of things that we're able to do there. So we become kind of the proxy point people in the emergency room settings to help out with following the death for justice of the peace or notification of law enforcement, and then the direction of the disposition after the death of a family member. So we've been doing a lot more of opportunities to work with folks while they're still living, possibly with some kind of a chronic or a terminal illness, that have a desire to be a donor after the time of their death. So Dr. Lassiter, I suspect you, like other physicians, have had, when you're doing your education, there was a cadaver that somebody had donated of themselves, their own body, so physicians can learn that skill set better. And so giving the opportunity for an individual to say they would like to be a whole body will donor is a really neat opportunity. There's a lot of education that we do inside of that. Our focus seems to be more from the Texas Tech Medical School more than any other institution in Texas. I want to say that there's 9 or 10 medical schools that have the opportunity for willed bodies to be donated to. Texas Tech works well because of their location in Lubbock and their accessibility to come this direction. I want to say that their range is about 300 miles, so that puts us inside of that. So Texas Tech is a good partner for us, that folks that want to do that. And we do have, from time to time, somebody that wants to donate their brain. I know a few years ago, following the National Football League's kind of impetus on recognizing how many head traumas, head injuries there were, and CT concussions, that after time of death, a lot of those folks wanted to be able to donate their brain for science to study that impact. And so it's kind of waned in popularity a little bit, but it's still done. And then also our touches that we get to do inside of the Shannon system at behavioral health. That's a really, for a lot of chaplains, they're surprised once I tell them that that's something that we get to do. Generally, we're out there about once a week, sometimes more is needed, but helping folks that are having some kind of an emotional or mental health issue when they're being treated on an inpatient basis, that spiritual component for care is still very real and very necessary. Our Shannon Associates Benevolence Fund is in its 23rd year. So I don't know exactly the participants for this, and Brian, you might know better than I would of how the Shannon Associates Benevolence Fund organized back in the day. But every year we have new associates that come on board, and I get a chance to go speak to them at orientation and ask if they would consider contributing $1, $2, $5 out of their paycheck. And they do that. A lot of them do collectively. And so we have, at the end of the year, or throughout the course of the year, thousands of dollars to help other associates that are having some kind of a financial emergency. Our jobs inside of the dietary end or housekeeping, laundry services generally don't pay as well as some of the other locations in Shannon. And generally there's folks that are having some kind of a hardship or a difficulty financially. So they can apply to the chaplain's office. We're able to do a little bit of counseling with them to see exactly what the specific need is. And generally, it's not just wholly an economic issue. There could be some kind of a familial situation that's changed. A husband has left the house, or somebody has lost a job, one of the breadwinners for the home. So helping them kind of sort through and talk about, how can we help out, not just with the financial piece, but the spiritual and the emotional. That's a lovely thing to be able to do for our staff. So I'm grateful that we get to do that as well. So we started a No One Dies Alone program. It's been about 3.5 years now. This is a program that was started by a nurse up in Seattle, Washington, 25 years ago. And we've adopted that same model here. So we've got trained volunteers. We have about 48 volunteers that are trained. Some of those are from Johnson Street that want to come and sit with those who are actively dying. It works by generally through a palliative care consult. They'll contact the chaplain's office. We find out that this individual may not have a family member or friend available. Sometimes it's not just necessarily because they don't have any, but maybe they're not able to be here with them, or maybe it's an elderly person and their spouse isn't able to drive after dark. So they'll contact the chaplain's office. We put the word out. I've got about 4 different groups that I'll text to, see who's available. They come up and sit 4-hour vigils at the bedside of an individual that's dying. They've been well trained and versed in how to help meet the spiritual needs of that individual. And sometimes just the comforting presence of somebody is a really powerful gift. I remember reading a survey years ago, and it said, by and large, the average person does not want to die alone or die in pain. So that makes it real simple. It doesn't take a lot to train somebody to go do that work, to sit at the bedside of somebody that's dying. Similar model, the No One Stays Alone program. We want to adopt that. And Phil said, consider talking about a big ask. Here's my big ask. In next summer, we want to try to roll out a program for No One Stays Alone. So any patient that comes to Shannon, we want them to have the opportunity to have somebody with them if they choose. So sometimes it's not uncommon to walk by a room and see a patient in there by themselves. And it's not a big deal to just stop by, say hello, check in on them. If you're working under the auspices of a chaplain, people are usually not put out with that too much. So we ask them if they've got other folks that are here with them. If they don't, just kind of get a feel for if they would like somebody to be with them. I'm saying that kind of in a projected way because we've not had anybody trained for that yet. There's a lot that we have to kind of navigate through. We'll do a background check. We'll make sure that we're equipping the correct people to do that work, to sit with folks. But I can envision some folks from Johnson Street Church of Christ that might be a willing participant to sit with those folks that are in the hospital and have nobody with them. So consider that. If the Lord just spoke to that word in you, Phil's going to be my man. And then this is also what we did during the pandemic. Shannon allowed us to have the opportunity to be the leaders to help get our families cleared to come in to see their loved ones. So we had our first patient, I want to say in March of 2020. We had the first death in May of 2020 from COVID. That individual died alone, and so did about the other 60 people until October 13th, 2020. That's when they allowed us to, and my pitch to them was, you guys have trained us, the chaplains who are not clinical, how to be safe, how to wear the PPE, how to have good practices, safe practices, to go in and see those folks. We were with a lot of those patients that were dying alone. And I said, if you can train us, we can train a family member to go do the same. And so they allowed us to do that. Shannon was the 4th hospital in the state of Texas that allowed families to start going in to see their patients with COVID. I'm very proud of that. I think that was a beautiful gift they gave. And they trusted us to do that. We did it well. As we're not aware of anybody that we got exposed or infected with the COVID virus during that span of time. I think ultimately we had 432 people die in Shannon with COVID, and that leaves a mark. And I'm grateful that they've allowed us to be able to be the ones to help facilitate those visits, coordinate, screen, make sure they were appropriate to come in to see their loved ones. And we also saw a big uptick in their recovery. Imagine that, having somebody with you that you love and care for that's at that bedside speaking truth to you or encouragement, or sometimes it was even tough love. Get your rear out of bed, Dad, let's go. And it made a huge difference. So I'm very, very grateful that Shannon allowed us to do that. And that's all I got. So I'm gonna let Robyn hop up here and talk, unless you think I should do a little Q&A. Come on, Rob. Good deal. I enjoyed listening to her much more than I enjoyed listening to myself.
Are you leaving me?
For this, a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Well, we just want to thank you so much for letting us come and speak. And my presentation will be just a little bit different. You'll see why here in just a minute. So I'm Robyn Tucker, and I'm a former labor and delivery nurse, going on 20 years now as a nurse. And what led me to this position? How many of you in here do not know what the White Rose Support Group is? Okay, all right. Well, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it tonight, but more than that, I'm going to tell you why we do what we do. So let me just tell you about me real quick. So I have a husband, JT, of 29 years. We have 2 beautiful daughters, Riley and Paige, and they are married to Bo Lassiter, Paige and Bo Lassiter, and Riley and Cal Arrett. And we have 6 grandbabies, 1 that lives in heaven and the other 5 that are here on earth. So we have a 7-year-old grandson, Jackson. We have Rowan Page, who is 5. And then we have Nixon Arrett, who is in heaven. And then we have Hendrix and Baker Mac and Elizabeth. So, yeah. We say them often. He knows their names. So I started out as a labor and delivery nurse after I was a former accountant. So I did that for 10 years and just always wanted to be a nurse, but for different reasons, I just didn't go that route. Went the accounting route, and 10 years later, I'm like, this is not for me. So I went back to school when I was 30. My girls were very little. And my second year of nursing school, JT gets a call to Southland Baptist Church to come in view of a call as the youth minister. And so we transported down here, and I said, as soon as my girls are grown, I'm moving back home. Well, as soon as they got grown, they had met people, and we had established roots here, and so this is home to us now. I started out as Shannon in labor and delivery and did that for about 3 years, and then left because of my little girls and his work schedule. Left and went to Head Start as their health coordinator. And I continued working with pregnant families, and I still loved that, always hoping to eventually get back to labor and delivery. So I went back eventually when the girls got older into a role of just PRN, and then I continued still working in my other role. And after our first grandbaby was born, the position, the woman who took care of the White Rose program, she was retiring, and so they actually, asked if I would be interested in doing that. So when I was a labor and delivery nurse, my very last day as a labor nurse, I remember I had a fetal demise. A baby had died, and so that's who I took care of, was that baby and that family. And I remember saying, I will never do this again, never, because it was so hard. It was very, very hard. Fast forward, 10, 11 years later, and the Lord just did such a change in my heart. And when I say I have found home, I have found home when I stepped into this role. So I get to teach the prenatal classes at Shannon, and that's the fun part of my job, but this is what I'm passionate about. So I think originally I was going to tell you what we do in the White Rose program, but today, just in praying about it, and I have this really long PowerPoint that we will not get to all of it, I heard the Lord say, I want you to tell them why we do it. So it may be, it will be kind of heavy. It may be a little emotional, but I think that I can share with you and have a greater impact so you understand why we do what we do if I can share some of my families with you, okay? So, here, I don't know how to do this. Just push here. Yeah. No. So what do we mean by perinatal loss? So when I teach staff at the hospital, how do you define perinatal loss? A lot of them will define it for me as a fetal demise, a stillbirth. And so I want you to look at statistics real quickly before I introduce some families to you. So actually, a perinatal loss is defined as a loss or death as the unintended ending of a pregnancy at any time, before or during birth, or death of a newborn in the first month after birth. There's 1 million fetal deaths that occur in the United States each year. Does that seem like a lot to you? Me too. 1 million too many. Of those 1 million, 26,000 of those are stillbirths. Okay, so that's only 2.6%. That leaves 97.4% with those very early pregnancy losses. So that includes miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, and Miller pregnancies. So if you're only looking at a perinatal loss or perinatal death as a stillbirth or those late-term deaths, then you've missed a huge part of our mamas and dads and families who are experiencing such a great loss. So out of those early losses, 25%, statistically, 25% of diagnosed pregnancies end in miscarriages. So if Shannon has about 1,200 births a year, that's an old statistic, but let's go with that number, there would have been statistically 1,600 pregnancies. And so there would have been 400 miscarriages. That's a lot of family that we don't want to overlook. Out of those 400, statistically, it says that 25% of those families will look at this like a life event, a logical outcome of a pregnancy that somehow wasn't meant to be. Whereas the other 75% will look at it as the loss of a baby, the loss of a dream, hopes, and parenthood. So I'm just kind of let that sink in while I get a drink of water. So if we have, in a room of 16 women, 4 would have experienced miscarriages statistically, and 3 of those 4 would view it as the loss of a baby. So that means 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 5 weeks, 20 weeks. Its gestation is not a determinant of how deeply they grieve. So the prevalence of perinatal death reflects a very real possibility that as a caregiver, minister, friend, or family member, even those outside maternal child settings will minister to or know a woman who has experienced the death of a baby. So my guess would be that every one of us in here, whether we knew it or not, we have encountered someone who's lost a baby. So how can we help? So I'm going to read to you, and just help me with my time. because I do have like 76 slides, and I know we can't get to all those. Crash the server. Okay. So this book that I'm reading from is called Held, and it's based off of Psalm 139. And it's the author, she's taken a lot of different mothers and fathers and family members, their experiences. And so this is something that, if you think it would be something you would want to share with someone, it's an amazing book. It's set up kind of like a devotional. So they're different moms who are telling their experience. But this mom that I'm going to read to you about is speaking about her miscarriage. She says, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not allowed to grieve my miscarriages because my prayers weren't answered, and God enabled me to become pregnant several times again after that scary day. My home is now filled with 6 vibrant children. Sometimes it seems that because God granted the desire of my heart, I don't have permission to feel sorrow over my losses, as if the babies we never met are unimportant or insignificant. After my first miscarriage resulted in an emergency hospital stay and a month-long recovery, I knew the reality of both physical and emotional suffering. Even though I have given birth to 2 sons and 2 more daughters, I also experienced complications from another miscarriage shortly before our last child was born, and each pregnancy was marked by the nagging fear of another loss. We've rejoiced over the babies placed in our arms, and we've also wept over the babies we never got to hold. I often hold back from talking about my experiences when I hear women who struggle with infertility sharing about their repeated miscarriages or their inability to conceive. I'm hesitant to enter the conversation because I don't fully understand. I can't relate to the woman who is unable to carry a baby to full term. I will never identify with the woman who spends years seeing fertility specialists and emptying her bank account only to be told that the chances of a healthy pregnancy are slim to none. I won't experience the agony of coming home from the hospital and staring at an empty crib, but I do know the pain of losing what you hoped for. I understand the trauma of being taken to a hospital in an ambulance. I felt the misery of delivering a dead child into a toilet. My uterus has been poked and prodded in order to remove all remnants of failed pregnancy. Miscarriage is awful. I still cry over the emptiness in my arms from the babies I loved but never knew. Yet greater than any understanding I may or may not have of another mom's experience is a confidence that God is intimately acquainted with my babies, my story, and my grief. God formed all 8 of my babies, and even though the lives of 2 of them were brief, every beat of their tiny hearts mattered because they were created in God's image. My babies have dignity, worth, and tremendous significance. We absolutely remember their lives with gratitude and love. Although I don't share my miscarriage stories with each hurting mom I encounter, I'm certainly able to empathize with her. I can listen, weep, and serve her in tangible ways that I believe will be helpful. As for my grief, well, I continue to realize that I'm allowed to feel that too. I've learned to bring my raw emotions to the Lord, and I've experienced the gift of His presence in the midst of my pain. The Psalms, particularly Psalm 18 and 71, have provided both instruction on how to voice my lament and a deeper understanding of God's unwavering faithfulness when life doesn't make sense. I've found great comfort in God's ability to tenderly and compassionately minister to my heart. In the darkest moments of grief, I cling to the reality that Jesus gets it. He understands intense physical pain. He has experienced unbearable emotional suffering. He carried all of our grief and felt every bit of our sorrow when He suffered and died on the cross. There's truly no greater comfort than this. God allowed me to have the big family I always wanted. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful. For my children, yes, of course, but mostly for the way God continues to reveal His glory in both my losses and my gains. Our gains will never undo our losses, but both serve to point us to the one who chose to lose everything in order for us to gain more than we could ever imagine. So I think she speaks, she's an individual, and she speaks her story, and it's not everyone's story, but it's important that we, as family and friends, as caregivers, that we hear other stories. I'm going to show you just real quickly, because I've just got a few minutes left here. This also is some parents' perspective. The depth of a parent's grief has nothing to do with the gestational age. And that's a very common misconception across the board. Well, you were only 8 weeks. Well, at least you can have more, or at least you have one at home. Okay, we hear these things that are so hurtful and very just they're already hurting, and then it's just like, one more stab. So gestational age is not a measure of the love that we have for our children. Our language has no word for a parent who has lost a child. So you heard her talk about, I may not know exactly what this mom or this mom or this mom has gone through, but I can listen. I can be there for her. I can weep with her. I can do those tangible things to help her. This is another perspective. It says, I know you more intensely than I have ever known anyone. We shared my body. I kept you warm and nourished and helped you grow. There was not 1 second of your life that was not spent in my presence. I held you your entire life, but still I feel like there was so much about you that I never knew, and now I'll never know. And this one, I want people to understand that even though she only lived 2 hours, she was a real person. So for time's sake, that's what I'm going to share with you, is just some insight and perspective on our families who have lost a baby through early pregnancy loss, or a late term, or even, if they were born and lived only a few days or up to a month afterwards. Those are the families that I take care of. What do parents lose when a baby dies? The loss of an identity, the loss of the natural order, the loss of innocence, the loss of a particular future, the loss of family order, and the loss of oneself. So for the White Rose Support Program, what we get to do, and I say we because it's not just me, I get to oversee and coordinate that, but this is something that not just I could do alone. The physicians, the nurses, the chaplain, the social workers, the people who come alongside to support these families inside the hospital, and then you guys, and how you support them once they come home, when they're at church, when they're out in the community, how you get to support them. Some of the things we do, and this is just a quick snapshot. What's my time? 1 minute? Okay. How can we help families? Listening is huge. I remember when I first started this position, JT, Dr. Dunham, and Karen Yansa were like my people that I always looked to. They showed me and really helped to lead me. I would steal things that I would hear from them when they would talk to patients. But eventually, I found that they weren't always there. And I had to let the Lord, through the families, teach me how to be a good caregiver, a good companion alongside them. So listening is very important. I think JT said it earlier. There are sometimes that words just cannot speak to them like our tears can, or our touch can. Or I remember, my mom very, very early on taught me, look people in the eye, look at their pain, don't look away from them. And to be there for them, to really carry that heart of theirs and their story with tender care. Touch, cry with the family, attend the funeral or memorial service. This is a really important one. Remember them on their baby's due date, birth date, and death date anniversaries. And I'm going to wrap it up here. So I think we're naturally uncomfortable with being with people in pain, and this one's a big one. But if I can give you just a few little tips on how to walk this journey with them, it's to be genuine, it's to really care, it's to hold their hand when they can't see where they're going. It's just to be that support, their companion. We can't fix it for them. There's no way to fix it. But we can walk alongside them and be that support for them. That shared grief, or that person walking alongside them, is huge. So let me end it with what this teddy bear is about. So the White Rose Support Group was started, I don't know, Cindy, what, like 30 years ago? Yeah. And a woman, she was a nurse, her name was Betty Fuller, she started it. And then after her was Cindy Rogerson. And so Betty began it, and then Cindy came in, and I feel like she really just paved the way. She really, opened the minds and the understanding to lots of the physicians and the nurses and just people in general. And then when the Lord brought me, I get to just build on that. And so it's just been just a beautiful work, I think, what the Lord's done. But this is something that each of our moms get if they get to see me. This is our White Rose teddy bear. And it is not just a stuffed animal. There is a real thing called empty arm syndrome. And when mamas leave the hospital and they don't have their babies to hold their babies here at their chest, I want them to have this, and so we give them these teddy bears. So if you see some mamas carrying these teddy bears, that's what they're for. So I'm going to end there because I'm out of time.
So let me ask a question or two real quick. How often does your group meet? And if there are people here that need to take advantage of that, or they have loved ones, friends, they contact you obviously, but how often do you guys meet?
Yeah. So I meet with moms and dads. Usually it's just moms, but I meet with them individually all the time. So that is, I work around their schedule, so that can be any time. We come together twice a year as a community. We have our Walk to Remember that we just had this last Sunday, and then we have our candlelight service coming up. Beautiful ceremonies, and it's just a really big part of their healing, actually, when they get to come together with other families who've experienced the loss. And then JT and I do twice a year a series called Grieving the Child I Never Knew. And so it's a 6-part session, and we come together. It's usually moms and dads. Anyone's welcome to come to that, but so that's twice a year. But seeing me is anytime they would want to.
So I asked, what's a big ask that you can ask of us tonight? And JT talked about the staying, No One Stays Alone program that he wants to see people maybe step up and volunteer, be part of. And so if you're interested in that, that's something we really want to encourage you with. What's something that we can do, that some of us can do to come alongside of you in your ministry?
There's a lot, but the one I came with tonight is these teddy bears. So the teddy bears and their pictures I think are one of their most valued treasures. And what's really, I think, so sweet about these teddy bears, I buy them for about $20, but I put that out there for people to donate in memory of, like for our grandbaby, and we get to tag them. And then when I give this to another mom, then I get to mention that baby's name. So I offer that to all of our White Rose families, or families who want to do that in support of another family. But these used to be just given to those moms who had those later term losses, but I want every mom to get one of these. So I go through these quite a bit. These go fast because I give if I see them in the hospital, they're going to get a bear from me. So that would be my ask. Okay.
All right, so you hear a couple of ways that you can come alongside these guys who are trying to minister in our community and bless people. I said earlier, Jamie and I have been through this together with these two, and they have ministered to us in very powerful ways. My wife's wedding band has 8 birthstones on it, which, if you know us, you know there's only one live child. And so we've been through a lot of this, and this is a very meaningful ministry to our family. And came a time when we were really low, and grateful that God provided you guys. And so I just want to encourage you to pray about the people you encounter every day, because you don't realize who they are. And they're next door neighbors. They're people who work in the cubicle next to you. They're the people that you pass going up and down the grocery aisle. They're sitting on the same pew as you on Sunday. And I pray that God gives us a sensitivity to minister to them. And you can see these two are super active in ministry, but there's a place for you to come alongside of them and help them. And I really would encourage you to ask God to show you, how can you use me? Because these two could use that help. And I'm grateful that, again, they're servants in God's hands. Father, thank you for your peace that rests upon us because of the sacrifice and the love of Jesus Christ. And may all that we are, all that we hope to be, bring you the glory you deserve. And as broken people, we are grateful that we are made whole through Jesus Christ. And that, God, you can lift us. Father, our prayer is that you give us a desire, a sensitivity, and a willingness to quickly go and serve those who are broken, that we really are your hands and feet. So use us tonight and this week in our community. Thank you for bringing Robyn and JT to us tonight. And it's in the name of Jesus that I pray.